There's a particular kind of silence that fills a childhood home when a child learns that their presence doesn't quite matter the way they hoped it would. It's not the silence of peace or rest. It's the silence of waiting, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for a question that never comes, waiting for eyes to meet yours with genuine interest, with warmth, with the simple acknowledgement that you exist in a way that matters. And tonight, as you lie here in the quiet, perhaps you recognize that silence. Perhaps it echoes somewhere deep inside you, in a place you don't often visit, because the truth about being ignored as a child isn't just about what happened back then. It's about what happens now, in the way you move through the world, in the way you love, in the way you fear, in the way you exist when no one is watching. The ignored child grows up. They become an adult who functions, who works, who smiles at the right moments, but inside, there's still that child standing in a doorway, holding something they made, something they're proud of, waiting for someone to turn around, and no one does. Psychology has spent decades trying to understand what happens in that moment, what happens when a child's fundamental need for attention, for validation, for simple recognition goes unmet. And what it's discovered is both heartbreaking and illuminating, because being ignored isn't just an absence of something. It's a presence. It's the presence of a message that writes itself into the nervous system, into the architecture of the self. And that message says, you are not worth noticing. Now, let's be clear about what we mean when we talk about the ignored child. This isn't about parents who occasionally got distracted or had a bad day. This isn't about moments of inattention or the natural ebb and flow of family life. We're talking about something deeper, something more persistent. We're talking about a pattern, a chronic state where a child's emotional world, their inner experience, their need for connection simply doesn't register as important to the people who matter most. Sometimes this happens in homes that look perfectly fine from the outside. The child is fed, clothed, sent to school, but emotionally, they're living in a desert. Their feelings are dismissed as overdramatic. Their achievements go unnoticed or met with indifference. Their struggles are invisible. They learn very quickly that their internal world is not a place anyone else cares to visit. And here's what makes this particular form of childhood pain so insidious. It's often invisible even to the child experiencing it, because there's no dramatic event to point to, no clear moment of trauma. There's just the slow accumulation of non-events. The birthday where no one seemed excited, the school play where no one came, the hundreds of small moments where they reached out and found nothing reaching back. Developmental psychology tells us something crucial about early childhood. It tells us that children don't develop a sense of self in isolation. They develop it through reflection. They see themselves in the eyes of their caregivers. They learn who they are by how they are responded to. When a baby smiles and the parent smiles back, the baby doesn't just feel happiness. They learn something profound. I can affect the world. My existence matters. I am real. But when that reflection is absent, when the child smiles and no one smiles back, when they cry and no one comes, when they speak and no one listens, something entirely different gets written into their understanding of reality. They learn that they are not effective, that their existence is somehow peripheral, that the world doesn't really change whether they're in it or not. The attachment theorist John Bowlby understood this deeply. He saw that children need more than just physical care. They need what he called a secure base, someone who is emotionally available, who notices, who responds, who cares. Without this, the child develops what we call an insecure attachment. And for the ignored child, this often takes the form of anxious attachment. They become hypervigilant to the moods of others, constantly scanning for signs of approval or rejection, never quite sure where they stand. Or sometimes it goes the other direction. They develop avoidant attachment. They learn to expect nothing from others, to rely only on themselves, to dismiss their own needs for connection as foolish or dangerous. They become the child who never asks for help, who sits alone at recess, who convinces themselves they prefer it this way. And both of these patterns, anxious and avoidant, carry forward into adult life like an invisible script. The ignored child becomes an adult who either desperately seeks validation from everyone around them or becomes someone who has learned to need nothing from anyone. And neither of these positions is where connection actually lives. Think about what it means to grow up feeling invisible, to have experiences, feelings, thoughts, dreams, and to slowly realize that no one is particularly interested in any of them. You come home excited about something, and the excitement dies in your throat because you already know it won't land. You feel hurt about something, And you learn not to mention it because hurt requires a witness, and there is no witness. The psychologist Alice Miller wrote extensively about what she called the drama of the gifted child. She was talking about children who learned to become whatever their parents needed them to be, who developed a false self to gain some scrap of attention. But there's another drama, equally profound, for the child who never even gets that far, the child who learns they can't become anything that will make them visible, so they stop trying. This is where shame enters the picture, not the healthy shame that helps us navigate social boundaries, but toxic shame. The kind that says there's something fundamentally wrong with you, because when a child is consistently ignored, they don't think, my parents are distracted or struggling or emotionally unavailable. They think, I am ignorable, I am not enough, I am fundamentally lacking in whatever quality makes a person worth paying attention to, and this shame becomes the lens through which they see everything. When someone does show interest in them, they're suspicious. When someone compliments them, they dismiss it. When someone wants to get close, they panic or sabotage, or simply can't believe it's real, because the deepest truth they learned, the truth that lives in their bones, is that they are not the kind of person who gets chosen, who gets seen, who gets loved. Years pass, decades even, and that ignored child is now an adult sitting in relationships they can't quite trust, doing work they don't quite believe matters, living a life that feels somehow like they're going through the motions, and they might not even connect it back to those early years. They might just think this is who they are, anxious, avoidant, unworthy, never quite enough. But here's what psychology also tells us, and this is where hope enters. The brain remains plastic. The patterns we learned can be unlearned. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are can be revised. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely, because the truth that the ignored child never learned is this. Their invisibility was never about their worth. It was about the limitations, the wounds, the struggles of the people who were supposed to see them. Some parents are so lost in their own pain, their own unmet needs, their own emptiness, that they have nothing left to give. They're not cruel, they're not evil, they're just empty, and you can't pour from an empty cup. Other parents are physically present but emotionally absent, distracted by work, by stress, by addiction, by depression, by their own history of being ignored. They're living in survival mode, and survival mode doesn't leave much room for attunement to a child's emotional world. And some parents simply never learned how to see a child as a full person. They see children as objects to be managed, problems to be solved, projects to be completed. The idea that a child has a rich inner world that needs to be witnessed and validated simply never occurred to them, because it never occurred to anyone in their life either. This doesn't excuse the impact. The pain is still real. The consequences are still real. But understanding this can begin to shift something. Because when you realize that your invisibility wasn't a reflection of your value, something starts to crack open. A possibility emerges. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, you were always worth seeing. You just weren't seen. And now, as an adult, you have a choice that you didn't have as a child. You can begin to see yourself. You can become the witness you never had. You can start to notice your own feelings, your own needs, your own inner experience with curiosity and compassion, rather than judgment and dismissal. This is what therapy, at its best, offers the ignored child. It offers a relationship where someone is genuinely interested, where your inner world matters, where you are not too much or too little, where you don't have to perform or hide, where you can simply be, and that being is enough. For many people who grew up ignored, the therapeutic relationship is the first place they experience sustained, genuine attention, and it can be transformative, not because the therapist fixes them, but because being truly seen begins to heal the wound of invisibility. But even outside of therapy, there are ways to begin this healing. It starts with noticing the pattern, noticing how you minimize yourself, how you assume people aren't interested, how you make yourself small or invisible or convenient, noticing how you might overshare or desperately perform, trying to finally get that attention you needed all along. Just noticing, without judgment, is the first step. Then comes the practice of self-witnessing. This means developing the capacity to pay attention to your own experience with kindness. When you feel something, instead of immediately dismissing it or judging it or trying to change it, you pause. You notice. You say to yourself, I'm feeling this. This matters. I matter. It sounds simple, almost too simple, but for someone who grew up ignored, this is revolutionary, because you're reversing the fundamental message of your childhood. You're saying, actually, my inner experience is worth paying attention to. I am worth paying attention to. And slowly, gradually, something shifts. You start to take up space differently. You start to speak up in meetings. You start to express preferences in relationships. You start to believe that your presence might actually add something to the world, rather than subtract from it. But let's be honest about how difficult this is, because the ignored child learned to survive by not needing attention, by being low maintenance, by not causing problems. And now, to heal, they have to unlearn all of that. They have to learn to need, to want, to ask, to expect. And every part of them screams that this is dangerous, that this will lead to rejection, that it's better to stay invisible. This is why healing from childhood neglect is often more complicated than healing from more overt forms of trauma, because there's no clear event to process. There's just a void. And how do you grieve an absence? How do you be angry at something that never happened? Yet the grief is there. The anger is there, buried under years of coping, of rationalizing, of telling yourself it wasn't that bad. And part of the healing is allowing yourself to feel what you couldn't feel then, to acknowledge that it was that bad, that you needed more than you got, that you deserved to be seen, and you weren't. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with recognizing what you missed. It's not just grief for what was, but grief for what could have been, the childhood you could have had if someone had just noticed you, the version of yourself you might have become if you'd grown up feeling valued. This grief is real and it's necessary. You have to mourn what you didn't get before you can fully move forward. And the anger, when it comes, can be shocking in its intensity, because you were so good, you tried so hard, you did everything right, you didn't cause trouble, you got good grades, or you helped with your siblings, or you stayed out of the way, and still, it wasn't enough to make them see you. That realization can ignite a rage that feels almost dangerous. But it's not dangerous. It's healthy. It's the appropriate response to what happened to you. The challenge is learning to feel this anger without letting it consume you, without turning it inward into depression or outward into bitterness. This is where the practice of self-compassion becomes crucial. You learn to hold the anger and the grief with tenderness. You learn to say, of course you feel this way. Of course you're angry. You were a child who needed to be seen, and you weren't seen. Anyone would feel this way. And gradually, as you work through these feelings, something else emerges, a kind of self-knowledge, a clarity about who you actually are beneath all the coping mechanisms and protective strategies. You start to discover what you actually like, what you actually want, what you actually need. Because when you're not spending all your energy trying to be noticed, or trying not to need to be noticed, space opens up for genuine self-discovery. You might find that you're more creative than you realized, more passionate, more opinionated, more sensitive, more everything than the small, careful version of yourself you learned to present to the world. The ignored child often has a rich inner life precisely because the inner world was the only place they had. They've been having elaborate conversations with themselves for decades. They've been noticing, feeling, thinking deeply about things. They just never had anyone to share it with. As you heal, you start to share it, tentatively at first, testing the waters, seeing if the world really will reject you for being visible. And here's what many people discover. Most people are so caught up in their own inner worlds that they're not judging you nearly as harshly as you judge yourself. In fact, many people are relieved when you show up authentically. It gives them permission to do the same. You start to find your people, the ones who are genuinely interested, who ask follow-up questions, who remember things you told them weeks ago, who see you. And the first few times this happens, it might feel almost surreal. You might not trust it. You might test it, push it, see if it's real. This is normal. You're learning a new dance and you've never had practice. But over time, with repetition, with consistency, something new gets written into your nervous system. A new message. One that says, I am seeable. I am worth knowing. My presence matters. And this isn't about arrogance or narcissism. It's about basic dignity. The dignity that should have been your birthright, but you had to earn through hard inner work. Let's talk about relationships for a moment, because this is where the legacy of being ignored shows up most painfully. The ignored child often becomes an adult who either avoids intimacy altogether or becomes anxiously enmeshed in it. They either keep everyone at arm's length, convinced that no one will really want to stay anyway, or they cling desperately, terrified that any distance means abandonment. In romantic relationships, they might find themselves with partners who are emotionally unavailable, recreating the dynamic they know best. or they might sabotage good relationships because the kindness and attention feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, too good to be true. They might cheat or pick fights or withdraw, anything to avoid the vulnerability of being truly seen and potentially rejected. Or they go the other direction entirely. They become the perfect partner, endlessly accommodating, never needing anything, always available, always understanding. They make themselves indispensable by being low maintenance, by never being a burden. But inside, they're starving for reciprocity, for someone to care for them the way they care for others. The path to healthier relationships involves learning that you can need things and still be loved, that you can express disappointment without being abandoned, that you can take up space without being too much. It involves choosing partners who are actually capable of seeing you, even when that feels scary. It involves speaking up when you're hurt instead of minimizing and pretending everything is fine. And it involves something really difficult, allowing yourself to be disappointed by people you love, because when you grew up ignored, you learn not to expect anything, so you were never disappointed. But to have real relationships, you have to risk disappointment. You have to ask for what you need, knowing they might not give it. You have to show up fully, knowing they might not meet you there. This is terrifying when your whole survival strategy was based on needing nothing. Friendships can be complicated too. The ignored child often struggles to believe that anyone would want to be their friend just because, not because they're useful or helpful or entertaining. So they become the friend who always listens but never shares, the friend who remembers everyone's birthday but whose own passes unnoticed, the friend who's always available to help but never asks for help in return. And then one day they look around and realize they have lots of people in their life but feel completely alone because no one really knows them. They've been so busy being whatever everyone else needed that they never let anyone see who they actually are. Healing this means taking risks. It means calling a friend just to talk, not because you need something or they need something, but just to connect. It means sharing something vulnerable and seeing if they can hold it. It means saying no sometimes and seeing if the friendship survives your boundaries. And for many ignored children turned adults, this is absolutely terrifying, but it's also the only way to build real connection. Work is another arena where this plays out. The ignored child often becomes either an overachiever, desperately trying to earn recognition through accomplishment, or an underachiever, convinced their efforts won't be noticed anyway, so why try? Sometimes they alternate between these extremes, burning out from overperformance and then collapsing into apathy. They might struggle to advocate for themselves, to ask for raises or promotions, to speak up in meetings, or they might overcompensate, becoming aggressive or boastful in a way that feels inauthentic. They're trying to figure out how to be visible in a professional context when they learned early that their visibility didn't matter. The healthy middle ground is learning that your work can speak for itself, while also recognizing that self-advocacy is not arrogance. It's learning to say, "I did this well," without waiting for someone else to notice. It's learning to take credit without feeling like you're being obnoxious. It's recognizing your own value, independent of external validation. And perhaps most importantly, it's learning that your worth is not determined by your productivity. This is huge for the ignored child who learned that the only time they got attention was when they achieved something. They become addicted to achievement, constantly needing the next accomplishment to feel okay about themselves. But no amount of achievement fills the void of not being seen for who you fundamentally are. Let's talk about what this looks like in the body, because trauma, including the trauma of emotional neglect, isn't just psychological, it's physiological. The ignored child lives in a state of chronic stress, always scanning for cues about whether they matter, always braced for dismissal. This activates the stress response system chronically, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline. Over time, this can manifest as anxiety disorders, depression, chronic fatigue, autoimmune conditions, digestive issues, chronic pain. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote, and the body of the ignored child is often a body that's exhausted from years of hypervigilance and self-protection. Healing often requires body-based approaches, not just talk therapy. Things like yoga, somatic experiencing, EMDR, or simply learning to be in your body without judgment. The ignored child often dissociates from their body, because the body holds feelings, and feelings were not safe to have. So they live in their head, disconnected from physical sensation. Coming back into the body is a crucial part of healing, learning to notice what anger feels like in your chest, what sadness feels like in your throat, what loneliness feels like in your belly. Learning that you can feel these things, and survive them, that emotions are not dangerous, they're information, and learning to care for your body, not as a project or something to control, but as your home. The ignored child often struggles with this. They either neglect their body entirely, or become obsessed with controlling it. Both are ways of continuing the pattern of not truly inhabiting yourself. True healing looks like gentleness with your body, feeding it when it's hungry, resting when it's tired, moving in ways that feel good, not as a should but as an act of care, saying to your body, I see you, you matter, I'm here now. There's something else important to understand about the legacy of being ignored. It creates a particular relationship with silence and solitude. The ignored child often becomes an adult who's either terrified of being alone or can only feel okay when they're alone. The silence that once felt like abandonment either becomes unbearable or becomes the only place they feel safe. Some ignored children grow up to constantly fill their lives with noise, with people, with activity, anything to avoid the silence that reminds them of not mattering. They become allergic to solitude, terrified that if they're alone with themselves, they'll realize how empty they feel. Others go the opposite direction. They become almost addicted to solitude, uncomfortable in groups, anxious around people. They've made peace with being alone, because at least then they're not waiting for someone to notice them and being disappointed. Healing involves finding a balance, learning that solitude can be nourishing rather than just an absence of people, and learning that connection can be nourishing rather than just a source of potential rejection. It's about reclaiming both, being able to enjoy your own company without it being a defensive retreat, and being able to enjoy others' company without losing yourself. Let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough: the ignored child's relationship with their own needs. Because when you grow up with your needs consistently unmet or dismissed, you develop a complicated relationship with having needs at all. Some ignored children become adults who can't identify what they need. Ask them what they want for dinner, and they genuinely don't know. Ask them how they feel, and they draw a blank. They've spent so long dismissing their own experience that they've lost access to it. Others become adults who know what they need but feel deeply ashamed of needing anything. They experience every need as an imposition, every want as selfishness. They can care for everyone else, but accepting care feels impossible. Healing this requires relearning that needs are not weaknesses, that wanting things is not selfish, that your desires matter. This sounds obvious, but for the ignored child, this is revolutionary. They have to unlearn decades of conditioning that told them they should need less, want less, be less. This often shows up around basic things: difficulty asking someone to turn down the music because it's too loud, difficulty saying you're cold and would like the window closed, difficulty admitting you're hurt by something someone said. All these moments where expressing a need or preference feels like too much, like an imposition, like something that will make you difficult or high maintenance. Learning to voice these small needs is practice for the bigger ones. Learning to say, actually, I don't want to go there, or I need some time to think about that, or that doesn't work for me. Each time you honor your own needs, you're rewriting the message that your needs don't matter, and gradually, you start to notice something. The people who truly care about you are not burdened by your needs. They want to know what you need. They're glad when you tell them because it helps them know how to be with you. And the people who are bothered by your needs, who make you feel like you're too much, those probably aren't your people anyway. This is hard to accept because the ignored child is so desperate for connection that they'll take any crumbs. They'll accept relationships where they have to stay small, where they can't ask for anything, where they're constantly accommodating. Because some connection, even unhealthy connection, feels better than no connection at all. But at some point in the healing journey, you realize that these crumbs are actually keeping you hungry, that settling for people who can't truly see you is just recreating the original wound, and that being alone, truly alone, is better than being unseen in the presence of others. This realization can be devastating and liberating at the same time, because it means you might have to let go of relationships that aren't serving you. You might have to set boundaries with family members. You might have to end friendships that are one-sided. You might have to be alone for a while, really alone, while you figure out what you actually want and need. And this aloneness is different from the loneliness of being ignored. This is chosen solitude. This is space you're creating to heal, to discover yourself, to learn to be your own witness. And in this space, something beautiful can happen. You can start to become the person you needed when you were young. You can learn to notice yourself the way you wish to be noticed. You can celebrate your own achievements. You can comfort yourself when you're sad. You can be interested in your own thoughts and feelings, not as a replacement for connection with with others, but as a foundation, because you can't truly connect with others if you're not connected to yourself. And from this place of self-connection, different kinds of relationships become possible. Relationships where you're not performing or hiding, where you can show up as you are, where being seen doesn't feel terrifying because you've already learned to see yourself. This doesn't mean the old patterns disappear entirely. Healing isn't linear. There will still be moments when you minimize yourself, when you assume no one cares, when the old fear of being too much or not enough rises up, but these moments become less frequent, and more importantly, you recognize them now. You can see the pattern playing out, and you have choices you didn't have before. You can pause, take a breath, remind yourself that this is an old story, not a current reality. Choose a different response. It's not about perfection. It's about having more options, more flexibility, more freedom, and over time, your nervous system begins to change. The chronic bracing starts to relax. The hypervigilance softens. You're not constantly scanning for signs of rejection or dismissal because you've built a foundation of self-worth that isn't dependent on others' responses. This is what secure attachment looks like even when you didn't start there. It's earned security, hard-won through years of inner work, through therapy maybe, through relationships that finally offered something different, through the daily practice of seeing yourself. Let's talk about forgiveness for a moment, because at some point in this healing journey, the question of forgiving your parents or caregivers arises. And this is complicated, because on one hand, holding on to anger and resentment can keep you stuck. But on the other hand, premature forgiveness can bypass the necessary grief and anger. True forgiveness, when it comes, isn't about excusing what happened or saying it was okay. It's about releasing the hope that the past could have been different. It's accepting what was while refusing to let it define what will be. It's recognizing that your parents were limited by their own wounds while also honoring that their limitations hurt you. Some people never get to forgiveness, and that's okay too. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, not even for your own healing. What you do owe yourself is the truth about what happened and how it affected you, the truth about what you needed and didn't get, the truth about who you are beyond the role of ignored child. And sometimes, if you're really lucky and do the work, you get to experience moments of genuine connection with your parents later in life. Moments where they see you, maybe for the first time. These moments don't erase the past, but they can add something new. They can show that people can change, that it's never too late for connection. But this isn't guaranteed. Some parents never develop the capacity to truly see their children. They remain stuck in their own limitations, their own defenses. And part of your healing is accepting this without letting it define your worth. You might have to grieve the parent you wish you had while relating to the parent you actually have. You might have to set boundaries that protect you while maintaining some level of relationship. Or you might have to step away entirely for your own well-being. There's no right answer here, only what's true for you. What matters is that you're making these choices from a place of clarity and self-worth, rather than from the old wound. You're not cutting off contact because you believe you're unlovable. You're making thoughtful decisions about who gets access to you based on how they treat you. There's a huge difference. The ignored child often struggles with this because they've been taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that you owe your parents no matter what. But healing sometimes means questioning these beliefs. It means recognizing that being related to someone doesn't give them the right to treat you poorly. It means understanding that you can love someone and still need distance from them, that you can honor what they gave you while acknowledging what they didn't, that you can be grateful for your life while also being honest about its costs. As you move further into your healing, you might notice yourself being drawn to help other people who were ignored, who feel invisible, who struggle to believe they matter. This is beautiful and natural, but it also requires caution, because there's a difference between healthy helping and recreating the pattern where you're always the giver and never the receiver. The ignored child often becomes a therapist, a teacher, a social worker, a caregiver of some kind. They become the person who sees others because they know what it's like not to be seen. This is a genuine gift. But it can also be a trap if you're using helping others as a way to avoid your own needs, as a way to finally feel valuable, as a way to earn the attention you never got. Healthy helping comes from overflow, not from depletion. It comes from a place where you're already full, where you have something genuine to give, not where you're trying to fill yourself up through being needed. This distinction is crucial. You have to keep checking in with yourself. Am I doing this because I genuinely want to, or because I need to feel needed? Am I giving from abundance or from scarcity? Am I neglecting myself in service of others? These questions aren't about judging yourself, but about staying honest. And sometimes you'll realize you need to step back from helping others and focus on yourself for a while. This can feel selfish, especially when you've built your identity around being the helper. But it's not selfish. It's necessary. You can't give what you don't have. As the years go by and you continue this work, something remarkable happens. You start to notice moments where you feel genuinely seen by someone and you're able to receive it. Someone remembers something you mentioned weeks ago and brings it up, and instead of dismissing it, you let yourself feel touched. Someone expresses interest in your life, and instead of deflecting, you share something real. These moments might still be tinged with discomfort at first. Your nervous system might still brace for the other shoe to drop, but you stay with it. You practice receiving. You practice believing that this moment of being seen is real and that you deserve it. And slowly these moments accumulate. They start to outweigh the memories of not being seen. They don't erase those memories, but they add something new to your story. They prove that the future doesn't have to be a repetition of the past. You might find yourself in a relationship where you feel genuinely loved for who you are, not for what you do or how you perform. And it might take you years to fully trust it, to stop waiting for it to end. But eventually, you do. Eventually, you let yourself have it. You might have children of your own, and discover a fierce determination to see them, to know them, to reflect back to them their worth. And in doing this for them, you continue to heal something in yourself. You become the parent you needed, and there's profound healing in that. Or maybe you don't have children, but you find other ways to interrupt the cycle. You're the friend who really listens, the colleague who notices when someone is struggling, the person who sees the ignored child in others because you recognize yourself in them, and you offer what you can: attention, presence, genuine interest. This is how generational patterns change. Not through perfect parenting or perfect healing, but through conscious effort, through choosing to do it differently, through being willing to see what was without being doomed to repeat it. And on the hard days, when the old feelings come back, when you feel invisible again, when the wounds feel as fresh as they did when you were 7, you remember, this is just a moment. It's not the whole truth. You've learned to see yourself even when others don't. You've built a foundation that can't be shaken by a single instance of being overlooked. You've learned that your worth doesn't depend on being noticed, that you exist fully even when you're alone, that you matter because you're alive, not because of anything you achieve or earn or perform. This knowing, this bone-deep knowing, is the antidote to the poison of being ignored. And maybe, just maybe, you start to understand something profound, that the sensitivity you developed from being ignored, the attunement to subtle cues, the rich inner life, the capacity for deep empathy, these aren't just scars. They're also gifts, painful gifts, yes, gifts you would have preferred not to need, but gifts nonetheless. You see things others don't see. You feel things others don't feel. You understand what it's like to be on the margins, and this understanding makes you kinder, more aware, more committed to seeing others. Not everyone who was seen as a child develops this. It's not better or worse. It's just different, and it's yours. This doesn't mean you're grateful for being ignored. It means you're making meaning from it. You're refusing to let it be purely destructive. You're transforming it into something that adds to the world rather than subtracts from it. And this is perhaps the ultimate healing, not erasing what happened, but integrating it into a life that's bigger than the wound. So tonight, as you lie here in the quiet, perhaps you can hold all of this: the pain of what you didn't get, the anger at what you deserved but didn't receive, the grief for the child who waited and no one came, and also the truth that you're here now. You survived. You're doing the work. You're learning to see yourself, and maybe that's enough for tonight. Maybe you don't have to have it all figured out. Maybe you can just rest in the knowing that you're on a path, that healing is happening, that every day you choose to notice yourself, to value yourself, to believe in your own worth. You're rewriting the story. The ignored child is still in you, will always be in you, but they're not alone anymore. You're there with them now, and you're not going anywhere. You're the witness they always needed. You're the one who finally turned around and saw them standing in that doorway, holding something they made, something they're proud of, and you're saying, I see you. I see what you made. I see how hard you tried. I see how much you needed to matter. And you do matter. You always mattered. Even when no one noticed. Even when you were invisible to them. You were always real. You were always worth seeing. And now you know it. Not perfectly, not all the time, but more and more. Enough to keep going. Enough to keep choosing yourself. Enough to believe that the rest of your life can be different from the beginning of it. This is the brutal reality of the ignored child. They carry a wound that never quite heals completely, but it's also the beautiful reality. They develop a depth, a sensitivity, a capacity for growth that transforms that wound into wisdom. Not because the wound was good, but because they refuse to let it be the end of the story. And so the ignored child grows up and keeps growing and learns that being seen starts with seeing yourself, and discovers that the attention they always craved was never really about others looking at them. It was about learning to inhabit themselves fully, to show up in their own life, to be present to their own experience. This is where the journey leads. Not to a place where you need nothing from anyone. Not to a place where everyone finally sees you the way you deserved to be seen, but to a place where you're no longer waiting, where your sense of self isn't contingent on someone else's gaze, where you exist fully whether anyone is watching or not. And this is freedom, not the freedom from pain or from memory, but freedom from the tyranny of needing external validation to feel real. You become real to yourself, and from that place, everything changes. You start to notice how much energy you spent trying to be noticed. How much of your life was organized around either seeking attention or protecting yourself from the pain of not getting it. And as you release this pattern, energy becomes available for other things, for creativity, for genuine connection, for simply being alive without a constant internal monologue about whether you matter. There's a lightness that comes with this. A playfulness even. Because when you're not performing for an audience, when you're not trying to prove your worth, you can just be. You can be silly or serious, messy or put together, without it meaning something about your fundamental value. You're allowed to be human, flawed, inconsistent, real, and relationships become easier, more natural, because you're not bringing that desperate energy of needing to be seen. You're just there, present, open. And paradoxically, when you stop needing to be seen, people often see you more clearly because they're responding to who you actually are, not to your performance of trying to matter. But let's not romanticize this. There are still hard days. Days when someone's inattention triggers you right back into that childhood place. Days when you feel invisible in a meeting or overlooked at a gathering, and it hurts just as much as it did when you were small. Days when you wonder if you're making any progress at all. On these days, self-compassion becomes crucial, not beating yourself up for still having the wound, not judging yourself for still being affected, just acknowledging, this is hard, this touches an old pain, and that makes sense. You're not broken for still feeling this. You're human, and you remember that healing isn't about never being triggered, it's about what you do when you are triggered. Do you spiral into shame and self-blame, or do you notice what's happening? Take care of yourself, and gently return to the present moment where you're an adult, with choices, not a child with none. More and more, you choose the latter. Not perfectly, not every time, but more often than before. And that's growth. That's healing. That's the work paying off. You also start to notice the small victories. The time you spoke up in a meeting, even though your voice shook. The time you told a friend you felt hurt instead of pretending everything was fine. The time you said no to something you didn't want to do without over-explaining or apologizing. These moments might seem small, but they're revolutionary. They're evidence that you're becoming the person you were always meant to be before you learned to make yourself small. And as you accumulate these victories, your nervous system starts to believe in a different story. The story that says you're allowed to exist fully, that your voice matters, that your presence adds something, that you're not an imposition but a contribution. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in small choices, in daily practice. It happens when you catch yourself minimizing your own experience and choose to honor it instead, when you catch yourself over-apologizing and stop, when you catch yourself seeking validation and instead give it to yourself. It happens in therapy sessions where you finally let yourself cry about what you didn't get instead of intellectualizing it. In conversations with trusted friends where you risk being vulnerable. In journal pages where you write the truth you've been avoiding. In meditation practices where you sit with yourself without distraction and discover you're actually good company. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, you notice that the world looks different. Not because the world changed, but because you're seeing it from a different place inside yourself. You're seeing it from a place of inherent worth rather than constant lack. You stop interpreting everything through the lens of rejection. Someone doesn't text back, and instead of spiraling into, "I knew I didn't matter," you think, "They're probably busy." A friend seems distant, and instead of assuming you did something wrong, you ask if they're okay. Someone criticizes your work, and instead of taking it as proof you're not good enough, you consider whether the feedback is useful. This shift in interpretation changes everything, because the external world hasn't necessarily changed. People are still flawed, still distracted, still inconsistent, but you're not taking their behavior as evidence of your worthlessness anymore. You're understanding it as information about them, not about you, and this allows for real relationships, because you're not constantly reading between the lines, searching for hidden rejection, testing people to see if they really care. You can take people at face value. When they say they care, you can believe them. When they're busy, you don't make it mean you don't matter. You're operating from a different baseline. Of course, this also means you become clearer about who actually is showing up for you and who isn't. When you're not desperate for crumbs, you can see more clearly when someone is genuinely reciprocating and when they're not, and you can make choices accordingly, not from a place of anger or judgment, but from a place of clarity about what you need and deserve. You might find yourself naturally drifting away from people who can't meet you in mutual connection, not in a dramatic way, but simply because you're no longer willing to do all the work. You're no longer calling 10 times for every one time they call. You're no longer always initiating, always accommodating, always bending. And you discover something interesting. The relationships that survive this shift are the ones that were real to begin with, the ones where there was genuine mutual care, even if it was hidden under your tendency to overgive. These relationships actually deepen when you start showing up more authentically, when you let yourself need things, when you're willing to be imperfect. And new relationships become possible, relationships with people who are also doing their work, who are also learning to show up authentically, who can meet you in vulnerability without trying to fix you or dismiss you. These relationships feel different, steadier, more nourishing, less exhausting. You realize that healthy relationships aren't about finding someone who sees you perfectly all the time. That's not realistic. It's about finding people who are willing to see you, who try to understand you, who repair when they miss you or hurt you. It's about relationships where there's room for both people, where you can be seen and see in return. And in these relationships, you learn what secure attachment actually feels like. You learn that you can have conflict without the relationship ending, that you can express a need without being abandoned, that you can be upset or disappointed and it doesn't mean everything is over. This is revolutionary. For the ignored child who learned that any expression of need or negative feeling might make them even more invisible, you learn to trust that good relationships can handle your full humanity, your happiness and your sadness, your excitement and your fear, your certainty and your doubt, all of it. And this trust allows you to relax in a way you never could before. You don't have to curate yourself so carefully. You can just be. And being just you, it turns out, is enough, more than enough. It's everything. There's something else that happens as you heal. You start to reclaim parts of yourself you had to shut down. The ignored child often learns to shut down their enthusiasm because it was never met with matching energy. They learn to shut down their sadness because no one wanted to deal with it. They learn to shut down their anger because it made them difficult. They learn to shut down their needs because they were burdensome. So you grew up with all these shut down parts, and you might not even remember what it felt like to be fully alive in all your emotions. But as you heal, as you create space for yourself, these parts start to wake up, and it can be disorienting at first. Suddenly you're feeling things intensely again. You're excited about things and you don't know what to do with that energy. You're angry about things and the anger feels huge, maybe even scary. You're sad about things and the sadness feels bottomless. This is normal. These are feelings you've been holding back for years, maybe decades. Of course they come back strong. The work here is to welcome them, to say, yes, you're allowed to be here. You're allowed to feel this. I'm not going to shut you down anymore. And to learn to ride these feelings like waves. They rise, they peak, they fall. They don't last forever. They're not dangerous. They're just energy moving through you. And as you practice this, as you learn to feel your feelings fully without getting lost in them, something beautiful happens. Life becomes more vivid, more textured, more real, because you're not dampening everything down to stay safe anymore. You're letting yourself have the full experience of of being human. You laugh louder. You cry more freely. You get excited about things without immediately talking yourself out of it. You let yourself want things without immediately explaining to yourself why you can't have them. You're becoming undefended. And yes, this means you can be hurt more easily, but it also means you can be touched more deeply, moved more fully, alive more completely, and you realize that this is what you were always meant for. Not for being small and invisible and safe, but for being alive in all the messy, beautiful, painful, joyful ways that humans are alive. The ignored child tried to protect you by making you small, but you don't need that protection anymore. You're strong enough now to be big, to take up space, to matter. This doesn't mean you become loud or aggressive or demanding. It just means you stop apologizing for existing. You stop prefacing everything with, "I'm sorry to bother you." You stop making yourself physically smaller in rooms. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. You just exist, fully. And you let the world adjust. Some people won't like this, especially people who benefited from your smallness, from your tendency to accommodate, from your need to be low maintenance. They might try to pull you back into that role. They might call you selfish or difficult or too much. And this is where you practice holding your ground, because you know now that you're not too much. You're just no longer too little. And if someone can't handle you at a healthy size, if they need you to stay small to be comfortable with you, then they're not your person, and that's okay. It's painful, but it's okay. You're choosing yourself, finally. And as you practice this, as you keep choosing yourself again and again, the guilt starts to fade. The guilt that came up every time you prioritized your own needs. The guilt that told you that taking care of yourself was selfish. The guilt that whispered you don't deserve this every time something good happened. You start to understand that this guilt never belonged to you. It was installed in you by a childhood where your needs were treated as problems. But it's not truth. It's just old programming, and you can question it. You can challenge it. You can choose differently. You can say, actually, caring for myself is not selfish. It's necessary. Taking up space is not wrong. It's my birthright. Wanting things is not greedy. It's human. And slowly, the guilt loses its power. It might still show up sometimes, but you recognize it now. You know it's just an old voice, not a truth. And in the space where the guilt used to be, something else grows. Pride. Genuine pride in who you're becoming. Pride in the work you've done. Pride in the fact that you didn't let your childhood define you, that you chose to heal, that you're creating a different life. This pride isn't arrogance. It's the opposite of shame. It's the healthy acknowledgement that you're doing something hard and you're doing it, that you're facing your pain instead of running from it, that you're choosing growth over comfort, that you're becoming the person you needed when you were young, and maybe, on particularly good days, you even feel grateful, not for the pain, never for the pain, but for the person it forced you to become, for the depth you developed, for the empathy you carry, for the wisdom you've earned, for the strength it took to keep going when everything in you wanted to give up. This gratitude doesn't erase the loss. It doesn't mean it was worth it, but it means you're making something meaningful from what happened. You're refusing to let it be purely destructive, and there's power in that. There's healing in that. As you move through the world now, you notice other ignored children. You see them in the kid at the park who's trying to show their parent something, and the parent is on their phone. You see them in the coworker who apologizes constantly for things that don't require apology. You see them in the friend who never talks about themselves, who deflects every conversation back to others. And when you see them, something in you wants to reach out, to say, I see you, you matter. Your existence is not an imposition, but you also know that people have to come to their own healing in their own time. You can't do it for them. All you can do is be present, be real, and maybe, if the moment is right, share a little of your own story. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the beginning of healing, and you become a safe person for others who are on this journey. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're willing to sit with pain without trying to fix it, because you understand what it's like to feel invisible, because you can hold space for someone's anger or grief or confusion without taking it personally or trying to make it better. This is a gift you can offer now, the gift of genuine presence, of true seeing, and it matters more than you know. Because when someone who's felt invisible their whole life is truly seen, even once, it plants a seed that says, maybe I do matter, maybe I am worth knowing, maybe there's another way to be. You remember what that felt like, the first time someone really saw you, how disorienting it was, how you didn't trust it at first, how you tested it and pushed against it and waited for it to go away. But it didn't go away, and slowly You let it in, and it changed everything. Now you get to be that person for others sometimes, not as a rescuer or a savior, but as a fellow human who knows what it's like to be unseen and who's committed to seeing. And this closes a circle somehow. The pain you experienced becomes the source of your capacity to help others. Not because the pain was good, but because you chose to transform it. And on the hardest days, when you're tired of doing the work, when you wish you could just be normal, when you're angry that you have to heal from something that wasn't your fault, you remember this. You are healing, imperfectly, slowly, but genuinely. You are creating a different story. You are proving that you're not doomed to repeat your past. Every time you speak up instead of staying silent, you're healing. Every time you honor your needs, instead of dismissing them, you're healing. Every time you let yourself be seen instead of hiding, you're healing. Every time you choose connection over protection, you're healing. It's happening, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when you take steps backward, even when you're exhausted by it all. It's happening. And one day, maybe not today or tomorrow, but one day you'll realize that you've gone a whole week without feeling invisible, or a whole month without assuming someone's inattention means you don't matter, or a whole season without that old familiar ache of not being seen. And you'll realize that the work has worked. Not perfectly, not completely, but substantially. You're not the same person you were when you started this journey. You're freer, more solid, more real to yourself. And that's everything. The ignored child is still in you, will always be in you, but they're not running the show anymore. They're not making all your decisions from a place of fear and scarcity. You, the adult you, the one who's done the work, you're in charge now, and you're making different choices, better choices, choices that honor your worth instead of confirming your unworthiness. And maybe this is the real victory, not that you're completely healed, not that you never struggle anymore, but that you've taken your power back. You've stopped waiting for someone else to make you matter. You've learned to matter to yourself. And from that foundation, everything else becomes possible. So tonight, as you finally begin to drift towards sleep, you can rest in this knowing. The journey isn't over. There's more work to do, more layers to peel back, more moments of pain and breakthrough ahead. But you're on the path. You're doing it. You're healing the wound that no one else could see, because you've learned to see it yourself. And that invisible child, the one who stood in doorways waiting, the one who learned to expect nothing, the one who made themselves small to avoid the pain of being overlooked, that child finally has what they always needed. They have you, seeing them, honoring them, refusing to let them be invisible anymore. You are the parent you needed. You are the friend you wished for. You are the witness that makes it all real. And that's not nothing. That's everything. That's how the cycle breaks. That's how the healing happens. One moment of seeing yourself at a time. One choice to honor your worth at a time. One decision to show up fully at a time. And slowly, imperceptibly, but genuinely, you become whole. Not undamaged. Not unmarked by what happened, but whole in a way that includes the pain, that has integrated the loss, that has made peace with what was, while refusing to let it dictate what will be. This is the brutal reality. And this is also the beautiful possibility that we can heal, that we can grow, that we can become more than what happened to us, that the ignored child can become the seen adult, not because someone else finally noticed, but because we learned to notice ourselves, and in that noticing, we became real. Finally, fully, undeniably real. And now you can rest. The work will be there tomorrow. The journey will continue. But for now, in this moment, you can simply be seen by yourself, held by your own awareness, real in your own experience. And that is enough. You are enough. You always were. You just needed to learn to see it. Sleep now. Let the weight of these words settle into your bones. Let them whisper to the parts of you that still doubt, that still hurt, that still wonder if you matter. You do. You always did. And now you know it. Not perfectly, not all the time, but enough. Enough to keep going, enough to keep growing, enough to keep choosing yourself again and again and again, until one day, it's not even a choice anymore. It's just who you are. Someone who knows their worth. Someone who takes up space without apology. Someone who was ignored but refused to stay